As Henry said, my name is Tom Dobbins. I'm Justice Peace Coordinator at Catholic Charities here in the Archdiocese of New York. And in that job, it's kind of a strange title. So one time I was at a conference, I remember someone was coming out to the elevator, they saw my name tag, and then someone, it was a husband and wife, one pointed to the other and said, "He's in charge of justice and peace in the world." And so the wife looked over at the husband and said, "Tell him he needs to do a better job." So what I'm in the process of doing here is hopefully trying to do a better job bringing communities together. But the way I'd like to start out our conversation today really is more why interfaith cooperation and interfaith work is important. And the way I'm going to start out by saying that is something that I think can give context to it all. On a personal level, it's important to me because I think all of us, I myself live in the New York metropolitan area, obviously we all do. Diversity is an everyday experience that we have. When we wind up going out of our school here and we wind up going home to our families, we encounter diversity all over the community, the society. Everywhere we go, there's diversity. And for myself too, there's a tremendous diversity in the number of people who are blessed to be in my pool of friends. I have many wonderful friends from all over the world, and one particular area I have many very good friends from is from the Middle East. I have friends from the Middle East who have come to live here for a time. Some have remained, some have gone back home. I have friends from the Middle East who are both Muslim and Christian. So from that perspective, I think that interfaith relationships and interfaith cooperation, I think, is very, very important. Another reason I think it's extremely important, and one of the reasons I wanted to try in a professional way to kind of develop and work in this area, is because the events in the first 10 years, I think, of this century, the terrible tragic events of, for example, we just opened up the museum downtown, commemorating the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. We also have its aftermath in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In a real way, those first 10 years tore our world apart in many, many real ways, and still sort of do. Tore apart myself. I lost people. Actually, I used to work in the World Trade Center. I lost people myself in the World Trade Center. It tore our city apart, and indeed it tore our whole world apart. And I think as Catholic Christians, we are called to be part of the engagement, part of that bringing together of communities, and part of trying to move that rift together. And the third thing I think Henry mentioned a little bit when he mentioned Diana Eck. The third thing I want to talk about is that as Catholic Christians, I think it's very important that we be part of this conversation across interfaith boundaries, because I know the word that Henry talked about when he talked about moving from diversity to pluralism is the word engagement. And I think as Catholic Christians, this is very important because we believe, first and foremost, in the example of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, I think for us, obviously has to be the lodestar, the person towards whom we are trying to move our lives. And in a very real way, when you wind up talking about Jesus, Jesus is not an idea, he's not a philosophy, he's not a doctrine, he's not a book. We believe that Jesus became man. Jesus actually came, God came down to earth and became man, and he became a person. And the way that God chose to engage with us is he chose to engage with us through conversation. He chose to engage with us through parables. He chose to engage with us actually person to person, to be able to wind up encountering other people and to bring those diverse persons together and to engage them, and in a sense to create a pluralism of goodness, a pluralism of charity, a pluralism of mercy. Another thing, I'm very happy to be in a Jesuit school and speaking when we have actually our first Jesuit Pope. I'm a big fan of Pope Francis's, and I think you ought to be too. And I think he's a very good example, I think, of what interfaith cooperation should look like on a macro level. Some of you may be aware, but one of the very first actions he did last Easter is he actually went about going on Holy Thursday, and as you may be aware, one of the things the priest does on Holy Thursday is washes the feet of people to imitate what Jesus did at the Last Supper. Oftentimes, according to canon law, this should really only be done, for example, to other men. But Pope Francis, by example, and I think he's kind of giving a message to us, reached out and not only washed the feet of women, but also washed the feet of women who were both Christian and Muslim. And he did so not just the very first year he was Pope, But he did so again this year when he went to an elderly home. First year he went out to a prison, second year he went to a home for the elderly. And again, he chose to wash the feet of women, he chose to wash the feet of Muslims. So I think from that perspective, he certainly is, I think, giving us a message of the importance of interfaith cooperation. I think it's something we should be listening to as well. And even in his words, Pope Francis, in his most recent apostolic exhortation, which is called The Joy of the Gospel, said a couple of things, and I just want to read two of them briefly to you. The first, he says, we should embrace with affection and respect Muslim immigrants who wind up coming to our countries. The reason he mentioned this is because in Europe there's been a lot of anti-Muslim feeling that has been growing, and he wanted to wind up addressing these things in the apostolic exhortation that he had. He also said that we must be careful to avoid hateful generalizations about Muslims, noting that in authentic Islam and proper readings of the Quran are opposed to violence. He also noticed that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. And he wanted to also bring out to many Catholics, which they may not be aware of, that in the Quran mentions Jesus, mentions Mary, mentions Abraham. Many of the same figures that are mentioned in our own Bible are mentioned in the Quran as well. Another thing that I would like to do, if I could, is just also mention that Pope Francis has a tremendous background when he winds up reaching back into Catholic teaching. Because we have a wonderful example of interfaith cooperation with Pope Francis's namesake, Saint Francis, who back in 1292, during the height of the Crusades, actually crossed enemy lines to go meet the Sultan of Egypt at that particular time and try to wind up engaging with him and wind up talking with him, and encountered it really left both men changed forever. In a professional sense, one of the things I would just like to bring up, and very, very briefly, is from 2009 to 2011, Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York undertook a program where we would bring together Islamic communities in the Bronx, Manhattan, and in Staten Island to work together with other communities that are working in cooperation with Catholic Charities in those same boroughs, and would work together on social service projects, such as food pantry operations, advocacy on food issues, youth food and cleanup drives, immigration support services, and joint participation in prayer services such as Martin Luther King prayer services, where those individuals would wind up coming together to encounter one another, as we had talked about beforehand, and to encounter each other as persons, working towards the same goal, working on the same goal that is important in both the Bible and in the Quran: feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting those who are in prison, doing all those other wonderful things that we are implored to do by both Jesus and by the writings of the Quran. And in this experience, we had many wonderful opportunities to wind up interacting with people. During the question and answer period, I would love to go into more detail about those, but I just want to give you a little bit of a background about where I'm coming from as far as this goes, because as Justice and Peace Coordinator, one of the most important roles I see is to try to wind up helping to foster peace in the communities and the parishes of the Archdiocese of New York. And I think the encounter between those who are from the Islamic community and from the Catholic community is one of the most important of those areas. So thank you, and I look forward to the question and answers.